Drake Interplanetary probably has one of the worst reputations in the verse. Pirate ships, cheap junk, tin cans held together with ambition and duct tape. That's the shorthand, and it follows Drake everywhere, from the Magnus shipyards to the shadier corners of Grim Hex, from UEE Navy briefings to landing pad small talk across the empire. The caricature is vivid, it's consistent, and it's been decades in the making. It's also, depending on who you ask, not the whole story. Because underneath the hanging wires, the missing panels, and the analog controls rattling on the way out of Atmo, there's a manufacturer that has quietly built itself into the 5th largest ship producer in the verse. Built from the ground up, not on prestige or politics, but on a single, stubborn idea that the people on the frontier deserve decent ships too. That's a story worth telling properly. Because the gap between what people think Drake is and what Drake really is, that gap is where things get interesting and is worth exploring. Welcome to Citizen Lore. Today, we're diving deep into Drake Interplanetary, their origins, the ships they build, and whether their reputation was ever really deserved. Drake's story begins in the early to mid-2800s, when a group of designers came together to develop a new type of ship, intended as a fighter for the UEE frontier militia. They attempted to create something new and unique, a ship that would perfectly adapt to the conditions found in the frontier regions. Unfortunately, they did not win the bid, as the UEE Navy went with a more familiar manufacturer instead. This, however, did not stop that group of designers. They went on to reappropriate their designs for the civilian market and named the ship the Cutlass. If the UEE Navy didn't want it, then perhaps civilians would. The pitch was simple: provide a low-cost, yet versatile option for private local militia groups located on the edges of UEE space, where the Navy rarely ventures. The pitch worked. The Cutlass went into production, and with it, Drake Interplanetary was born. Jan Dredge took the lead as the first CEO in 2845, alongside a board of 7 members made up mainly of the designers who had worked on the Cutlass. From there, things expanded rapidly. Rather than choosing an established system like Terra or Earth for their headquarters, Drake chose Magnus, a frontier system where little development was happening and opportunity was wide open. As sales began to rise, Drake expanded its presence there, eventually opening 6 off-world factories and establishing licensed dealerships across the empire, ultimately becoming one of the biggest manufacturers in the verse. Drake had shaken up the market and positioned itself as a major competitor to the other manufacturers, not just because they built cheaply, but because they offered a genuine alternative to the expensive, core system-focused manufacturers, an alternative for those on the frontier. So what are Drake ships actually like? Do they live up to the reputation of being cheaply made, barely holding together, and about to fall apart? The answer is, well, yes and no. Every manufacturer in the verse has their own way of building ships, their own design philosophy. Some build military, others sleek, others industrial. Drake, though, stands apart from all of them. Its rough and simple designs contrast sharply with the more refined offerings from the competition. Drake can best be described as ultra-utilitarian, an industrial design built around function over form. Comfort is secondary. Function takes precedence, and that function is to be a workhorse, a ship that does its job reliably and can tackle a variety of roles at the same time. And doing their job is exactly what Drake ships are good at. Yes, they may not always be the best at it. Take the Drake Golem, a smaller mining ship with fewer capabilities than the more established Misk Prospector. But it still gets the job done, costs considerably less, and fits aboard far more ships than the Prospector ever could. Or take the Cutlass, Drake's very first ship and the entry point for so many professions in the verse. It can be used for mercenary or bounty work, has enough space for a small hauling contract, and can carry various vehicles for ground mining operations, all at an affordable price. Sure, it may not be the best at any one of those jobs, but it can get all of them done reliably. Drake presents a solid way to enter almost any profession in the verse. Even the father of the current CEO, Andon Arden, started his hauling business with a Drake Cutlass. So if you have a ship that gets the job done, does it really matter that there are missing wall panels and cables hanging from the ceiling? One should also not confuse rougher aesthetics with cheap construction or fragility. Yes, Drake ships are often less armored than those from manufacturers like Aegis, but Drake doesn't build military ships. What they lack in armor is compensated for with shields and weaponry. The myth that Drake ships are fragile or prone to breaking is just that, a myth. Drake ships don't break down or suffer critical failures any more often than those from other manufacturers. If anything, their utilitarian nature makes them easier to maintain. There's a running joke that Drake repair kits consist of nothing more than duct tape. Meant as an insult, it actually illustrates the point rather well. Drake ships are straightforward to repair, compared to other vessels that require specialized manuals and trained engineers only found at major spaceports. So yes, Drake ships look rough. They may not excel at everything, and they do lack certain amenities, even safety features like escape pods. But that doesn't mean they are badly or cheaply made. Drake ships are reliable workhorses of the verse. Rough, but they get the job done. Drake Interplanetary also carries another stigma, that of piracy. Many accuse Drake of deliberately selling ships designed for use by pirates. While these accusations are not always truthful, there is, in fairness, some truth buried in them. The pirate stigma began right at the start of Drake's history. The UEE had already rejected their militia fighter proposal, a poor first impression, and yet Drake took those same designs and redeveloped them for the civilian market, a bold move that raised eyebrows from the start. Drake's choice of Magnus as their headquarters only added to the controversy. Magnus was known at the time as a hotbed for criminal activity. To top it off, the UEE Navy developed a quiet but lasting distrust of Drake, even going so far as to exclude them from Invictus Launch Week celebrations that every other manufacturer was invited to attend. The biggest blow, however, came from what became known as the Drake piracy scandal. Founder and CEO Jan Dredge was recorded during an undercover interview making controversial statements about selling Drake ships to known piracy groups. These statements were enough to push Dredge into early retirement, prompt a search for new leadership, and force Drake's board to issue a formal public apology. These were statements, not proven transactions. There is no evidence that Drake ever sold ships directly to pirates. Nevertheless, it has to be acknowledged that roughly 2/3 of the ships used by pirates and outlaws in the verse are manufactured by Drake. Those are not comfortable numbers. Looking at a figure like that, it is easy to point the finger at Drake as complicit, but the more likely explanation is far simpler. Drake ships are cheap, produced in large volumes, and easy to acquire. And while Drake controls direct factory sales, no manufacturer can meaningfully control what happens to a ship once it passes through a third-party vendor. That is a problem every manufacturer faces. What is certain is that Drake took the scandal seriously. Under new CEO Andon Arden, new measures were put in place, most notably a mandatory annual training program for all sales associates, reviewing both company policy and relevant UEE and local law. This gave Drake greater control over where factory-fresh ships ended up and ensured that direct sales complied with legal standards. Magnus itself has also changed. While the system still has its rough edges, it is far more stable, prosperous, and civilized than it was a century ago. Choosing it as headquarters was partly a financial decision. The UEE Navy had left behind enormous unused shipyard infrastructure, but it was also a philosophical one. Drake doesn't build ships for core world markets. It builds them for everyone else, the people on the frontier, the ones doing the day-to-day work that keeps the verse running. Drake has had a complicated entanglement with piracy throughout its history, whether intentional or not. The company has worked hard to shake that stigma. And while Drake is and always has been a profit-driven corporation, it keeps demonstrating that the people it builds for matter. As CEO Andon Arden once put it, "My goal is to make ships that people want." Unfortunately, some people use our ships in ways that were never intended, and we strongly condemn anyone who does so. It has always struck me as interesting that the same dependability, versatility, and ruggedness that makes Drake the choice of so many pilots, small business owners, and militia also makes us popular with others who sometimes stand counter to the principles of the UEE and her people. Power to the people. That is the motto of Drake Interplanetary, and it broadly captures everything the company stands for: its philosophy, its design language, its place in the market, building affordable yet dependable ships for the everyday working people of the verse. It is a market that until Drake arrived had been left largely untouched by every other manufacturer. Aegis and Anvil, for example, cater primarily to the UEE Navy, having opened up to the civilian market only relatively recently. Even then, Their lineups consist almost exclusively of military craft, with very few industrial options available. Their ships are dependable and extremely sturdy, built with military-grade components, tough armor, and strong weaponry. They are made for war, for frontline operations, for conflict, and for that purpose, they are excellent. It is difficult to compare those ships with what Drake builds, because Drake simply is not a military contractor. While the company has made moves in that direction, the Drake Ironclad being their most serious attempt at a heavily armored military-adjacent vessel, those ships are still not designed for actual warfare. They are built more for local operations, frontier militias, and patrol duties on the edges of UEE space. They hold their own in that segment, not as tough as an Aegis or Anvil ship, but compensating with speed and ample armaments. Then there are manufacturers like Nisk and Argo, both major names in industrial shipping, with Crusader holding a strong foothold in transport. These ships are excellent at their intended roles and built to a high standard, but they are geared toward wealthier buyers, those who value comfort alongside function and don't mind paying for it. That comfort comes at a significant cost. Drake competes directly in this space and holds its ground simply by building more cheaply and keeping the focus on function over form. At the far opposite end of the spectrum sits Origin Jumpworks, with ships built exclusively for the ultra-rich, designed for touring and pleasure cruising, where form towers over function and comfort reigns supreme. If Drake is the workhorse of the verse, Origin is the show horse. But perhaps the most interesting comparison of all is with Roberts Space Industries, because on paper, RSI and Drake are after the same customer, the everyday working citizen of the verse, the independent pilot, the person who just needs a reliable ship to make their living. RSI's marketing hammers this point relentlessly. The Aurora, the Constellation series, ships built for the common person, they say. Then you look at the price tags, you look at the interiors. RSI ships are polished, elegant, almost aspirational. They sell you the dream of being an everyday hero. Sleek cockpits, clean lines, the kind of ship that looks impressive parked at a landing pad. RSI's definition of the people seems to quietly assume those people have a certain number of credits to spare. That is perhaps Drake's most honest pitch. Not freedom as an ideology, but freedom as a practical reality. The freedom to actually afford your ship. The freedom to replace it when it gets blown up, without it ruining you. The freedom to not be locked out of the stars because you couldn't secure financing for something prettier. Power to the people, it turns out, means something quite different when the people in question actually have limited power. So what do we make of Drake Interplanetary? A pirate manufacturer? A cheap shipyard churning out glorified tin cans? Hardly. Drake is, without question, one of the most unique manufacturers in the verse. Where others compete on prestige, military contracts, or luxury, Drake carved out its own lane entirely. Rough, utilitarian, and unapologetically functional. Their ships aren't pretty. They were never meant to be. They were meant to work, and work they do. From the humble Cutlass that launched the company to the sprawling Caterpillar, Drake has built a lineup that gets the job done across almost every profession in the verse, reliably, affordably, and without pretension. Yes, Drake has had its share of controversy. The dredge scandal was real, the UEE's distrust is real, and the piracy numbers are hard to ignore. But let's be honest about what those numbers actually mean. Outlaw in UEE terminology is a broad brush. It covers everyone from actual pirates to frontier settlers operating outside UEE jurisdiction, smugglers moving basic goods through restricted systems, and militia groups the Navy simply doesn't approve of. Many of them fly Drakes, not because Drake armed them, but because Drake ships are cheap, available, and easy to replace when things go wrong. That's not a conspiracy, that's economics. And here is the comparison nobody seems to want to make. The largest criminal organizations in the verse, the ones running actual fleets, waging wars, terrorizing shipping lanes. Yes, they have Drake ships, and in significant numbers. But they are also flying Hammerheads, Polaris corvettes, and Idris frigates. Ships manufactured by Aegis and RSI, the very companies that have spent decades pointing fingers at Drake. One Idris frigate poses a far greater threat to a system than a fleet of Cutlasses ever could. Yet nobody is calling Aegis a pirate manufacturer. Nobody is questioning RSI's ethics because a crime lord bought a constellation somewhere. The double standard is glaring, and it speaks far more to corporate politics and UEE bias than it ever has to Drake. Drake's real crime, if you want to call it that, was building ships for the people who actually needed them, and refusing to apologize for it. They set up shop in Magnus when nobody else would. They built ships cheap enough that a first-generation hauler could actually afford one. They gave people on the frontier a fighting chance without asking them to take out a loan they'd spend a decade paying off. So is Drake perfect? No. Is the stereotype entirely without basis? Also no. But the full picture is far more interesting than the caricature. Drake Interplanetary is a company that bet on the people the rest of the verse forgot. And it turned out there were far more of those people than anyone expected. Power to the people. Turns out that's not just a motto. It's something to live by. And that's it for today's deep dive here on Citizen Lore. If this got you looking at Drake ships a little differently, or at least appreciating those hanging wires a bit more, then the job is done. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a subscription go a long way. Fly safe, and until next time.